everybody. Today is December 6th, and my name is Ben Charles. This is your episode 265 of the At Percussion podcast. With me, as always, are my co-hosts, Casey Cangelosi.
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Doing well. How are you, Casey?
Good, thanks.
Casey, you've had some excellent recordings you've put out of your students as of late. Congratulations on those.
Thank you. Yeah, it turned out, we had some time with COVID. It's interesting what you can get done without concerts hanging over your head. I know several other people have had that opinion too, but yeah, it held true this semester for sure.
Yeah. And then Ksenija Komljenović, as always.
Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am truly impressed with your baking skills yet again. And I just wanted to announce that I'm moving into your kitchen in a week. So.
Yeah, those didn't look real. I thought you just grabbed a photo of some freaking cinnamon buns or whatever.
Well, I've told Ksenija that she's going to be a guest artist sooner or later. I told her she would get the VIP treatment that Casey got with my cooking. And as always, Karli Viña, happy birthday, Karli.
Yay, thanks, Ben. What could be better than recording the podcast on your birthday?
Yeah. Karli is 25 years old today. Congratulations, Karli.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well,
actually, we usually do history, what happened this day in music history on our release date. But for the record, on our recording date this year, it's my birthday. Also, I'm proud to share the same birthday as another wonderful percussionist, Alan Abel.
Oh, okay.
Very nice.
All the greats.
Right. What a good day. It's a good day to be born.
Well, Karli, since you mentioned some history, today is January 7th. What happened in history on January 7th? Or sorry, our release date is January 7th. What happened on January 7th in history?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good history day, actually, in music, I think. January 7th, 1955 is the day that Marian Anderson became the first Black person to ever sing a leading role at the Metropolitan Opera. This was her Met debut. She had already had a really distinguished performing career spanning decades at this point. She had given recitals on the Met stage, like something like 7 or 8 of them as a rental, but not as an official part of the company. And she actually debuted with the New York Philharmonic 30 years before this in 1925. But in 1955 is when she premiered with the Met. She was really well known in her concert repertoire for performing Lieder, European art song, Negro spirituals, and even actually seemed to avoid opera throughout her career. And it's reported that opera companies in Paris, in Geneva, in Moscow, and also the National Negro Opera Company in the US had all courted her and tried to get her to be a part of their company, but to no avail. She always seemed more comfortable on the concert stage and also had said that she lacked the dramatic training that's necessary for opera. On top of this, she was also a contralto, and there are not too many main roles for contralto in the standard opera repertoire. But aside from performing on the concert stage, Marian Anderson is actually really well known for her 1939 concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. This was a response to the Daughters of the American Revolution, who had forbidden her from using Constitution Hall as a venue based solely on her skin color. So she decided she'll just give a public concert for 75,000 people from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, kind of in protest. Interestingly enough, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. happened to be in the audience at this concert. And later, Marian Anderson actually sang at the March on Washington in 1963, where MLK Jr. gave his very famous I Have a Dream speech. So I thought that was nice to learn about. This is one of the biggest things that she was known for. In 1955, the Met was definitely breaking boundaries with this casting, and it paved the way for so many Black vocalists later, including Grace Bumbry, Leontine Price, and Jesse Norman, just to name a few. But in a lot of ways, the decision could be criticized because the Met really played it safe. For one, the role that she sang in her debut was Ulrica from Un ballo in Maschera by Verdi. And this character is kind of a fortune-telling witch that Verdi specifies in the score should be Black, should be portrayed as Black. But common practice at that time was for white women to play Ulrica and darken their faces. So they gave her this role that was meant to be portrayed as a Black woman anyway, and it's kind of a supporting role. Also, according to an article that I found published by WQXR, New York Public Radio, just a few years ago, the Met's director at the time, Rudolph Bing, made sure that Anderson would be working with a conductor that she had worked with before, Dimitri Mitropoulos. So knowing that the collaboration would kind of be safe and workable and everybody would be okay with it. And also it's reported that he kept the board members in the dark. They didn't know she was going to be cast until after the contract was signed, and they couldn't do anything about it anyway. So anyway, regardless of all of this, it's a very big deal to be the first Black person to perform as a part of the Met Opera. It was groundbreaking, and it paved the way for so many people to come, and to kind of keep all of this in perspective. Also, 1955, when Marian Anderson made her debut, was only 1 year after the Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus Board of Education, of course, the ruling that segregation of schools was unconstitutional. So think about, the timeline of everything that happened there. So that's a nice thing. January 7th, 1955, Marian Anderson debuted at the Met.
I had one fun fact I read to add, and that is that performance she was denied at Constitution Hall. She got the other one at the Lincoln Memorial because Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, she resigned in protest and instead set Marian Anderson up with this much bigger profile gig. And I guess later the DAR invited her back, and she was received really well, and some years later.
I didn't know that. That's very cool. Thanks, Casey.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, it's so nice to hear of Marian Anderson using literally her voice to make a change in the world. And our guest artist today is someone that has done quite the same thing. And on episode 187 with John Lane, I asked a question about Alan Otte, and John just said, well, you should have him on podcast himself and ask him. So it's so nice to welcome today Alan Otte to the podcast. Alan is a Percussive Art Society Hall of Fame member with Percussion Group Cincinnati, his very famous chamber group that he is a founder of. In addition to his work with Percussion Group Cincinnati, he presents The Innocents, which is a social justice advocacy effort regarding wrongfully imprisoned inmates with John Lane. Alan has worked with such venerated composers as John Cage, Herbert Brun, and Frederick Rzewski. So please welcome to the podcast, Alan Otte.
Hi, what took you guys so long?
Yeah, we had to practice. We needed 100 more episodes of practice.
That's what I was telling myself. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a very long list of hopeful guests, and you've been on it for quite a while. So welcome to the podcast. And Casey, I think you have a little souvenir of Alan's past to show us.
Well, yeah, once again, I have to thank my predecessor, Bill Rice, for leaving his awesome record collection. I've shown this on the show before, but this is the Blackearth Percussion Group album. It's an actual record. So record is this thing that kind of looks like a CD, but I don't even think you all know what CDs are anymore. So just, it's a thing that played music. And it's what Al, 72? Is that when this is?
1972, and I think thanks to COVID, that my hair is actually longer now than it was then.
So, you know what I think about like attractive looking dudes? It's this. It's this here. I don't know why people don't.
Is that Blackearth Percussion Group or the rock band Kansas? It's hard to know.
But I love this. I've shown this book from the inside before. It's really cool. You get little I don't know, you get little excerpts of the score inside, and I don't know, it just seems like this
back in the day when composers were still actually writing their scores themselves with pens and pencils and graph paper. Yeah.
It's really beautiful stuff. I have shown it on the show before long ago, but I mean, it's really neat what's in this record. How did this, I mean, gosh, I don't even know where to start. There's so many questions we could ask about this record, but geez, I don't know, dude. What is there maybe something you could share with us about making this record, or I don't know, any fun stories behind how this happened? I mean, it must have been such an exciting time.
I could share this, Carl Palmer, the drummer of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, If you've heard of that group, I don't remember what it sounds like, but I think they're extremely famous. That guy owes me $5 still.
Still.
He's being called out right now.
Well, and with inflation, that's probably $9 or something.
He's actually the next guest, so we'll ask him.
Somehow, when the album came out, people heard about it, people in different, interesting musical circles. And we got, I think, a letter from his management, from Emerson, Lake and Palmer's management. And the management says, Carl Palmer has heard about this album and he really wants to have a copy. So the other guys in the group said, well, I mean, this is like the most famous thing that's happened to us so far. This is really great. Of course, we have to send this to Carl Palmer. And I said, this is like one of the most famous rock drummers in the world right now. He can afford it. Well, I'm sending him a bill. I'm putting a bill for $5 in the album, which the other guys were pissed off. And I put a bill for $5 in, and we never got our $5.
What's a pissed off Mike Udow like? I want to see that. I can't imagine it.
Actually, I don't think well, that's just it. The others all thought it was fine to just, that we should just be nice guys and send it. I mean, I wanted to be a nice guy, but I was the one who was grumpy about.
Sure, get your $5. Do you know how many copies are out there?
Well, no, I don't know. Here's another more recent story about that. So Glenn Cochee was in town playing. This is already 5 or more years ago, playing at the Contemporary Arts Center, and I don't think I recognized him. I'm embarrassed to say, okay, I wasn't. So maybe it was 10 years ago or something. Anyway, we were both at a rehearsal. We were sitting watching a dress rehearsal of something else that was going to be on this Contemporary Arts Center show. And I leaned, and so there's this guy sitting next to me, and I had some comment about what was going on, and I leaned over and just said to him whatever my comment was, made some wisecrack about the people on stage, just for the fun of it. And he says to me, well, aren't you Alan Otte? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said,
sure.
I mean, and he said, if I'd known I was going to see you, I would have brought my copy of the album for you to autograph. And I said, well, we were on tour just a couple of years previous to that, and I always go into used bookstores, and I went into this used bookstore in maybe Missoula, Montana, or some Bozeman, something like that out there. And I'm paging through, these bins of LPs, and I came across the Blackearth LP. So I pulled it out, I autographed it, and I put it back in. And
sir, you're gonna have to pay for that.
Yes, sir.
And so Glenn says, well, how much were they selling it for? And I said, well, I guess 50 cents. I don't know, probably 50 cents. And he says, geez, I paid $100 for mine.
Wow. Cool.
And yeah, Gary and Rick and Mike and I definitely do not see any of those $100 purchases.
Sure.
Well,
yeah, I mean, we've talked once in a while. We talk about it a little bit. That maybe it would be nice if it were re-released, on a CD or something. But it's already too late for that, right? You don't want it on a CD either.
Well, Alan, I wanted to ask a couple questions in particular about Blackearth Percussion Group. A lot of the time we get these questions of like, how do you make it when you just graduated college? What's the next step? How do you make a career out of this? And I remember a long time ago reading about Blackearth Percussion Group, and I think it was maybe a PAS interview with you. And it was like, oh yeah, we had this kind of pie in the sky dream that we would have our own farm and we would grow all of our own food and be this like self-sustaining thing. And first of all, what did your parents think about that? And then beyond that, can you tell us about how this group evolved? And I'm not sure if it was Blackearth or Percussion Group Cincinnati. It might have been the latter. I remember hearing about like all the members split like one university position at the University of Illinois for a year, and it was, I mean, everyone was getting paid a quarter of a salary. So could you tell us about how you survived those early days? And seriously, what did your parents think? What did your friends think? What did your family think?
My father really wanted me to get a mus ed degree just to fall back on. You know, you should have something to fall back on, he always said. It was actually Gary and Rick's parents. Gary's father, Gary and Rick's father, was a very successful businessman in Chicago, and had purchased sort of just then purchased a weekend farm, a place to have fun at, just outside of Madison. And he was in Blanchardville, Wisconsin. And when we first had this idea, the idea was that there was a big barn on this farm out in Blanchardville, and there was really no other option at that moment. So yeah, we were going to go to the Kvistad family farm, and we were going to have to clean up this barn somehow, and that was going to be the rehearsal studio. So two things. First of all, Gary's father said, you know, there's a town right down the road called Blackearth. Wouldn't that be a better name than the Blanchardville Percussion Quartet? So thanks to Gary's father. And then what? How did Tom Siwe heard about it? I mean, I guess we told him. You know, we were very busy writing, you know, typing typewriters, real typewriters, sending letters and postcards everywhere about this plan. And I mean, Tom Siwe was the savior of this whole thing. He knew that was preposterous. I mean, how long was that going to last for the four of us to show up on a farm and try to convert it into a recording studio? And I mean, none of us had that kind of background or experience. So it was just at that year that U of I built the new music building down the block from Smith Hall, so that all of the previous years, the percussion department had just one or two rooms in the basement of Smith Hall. And as of the next year, everybody else was moving to the new building, and the whole first floor, the whole bottom floor, as it's been ever since, of Smith Hall, was given over to percussion. So Siwe, so it's not like he had to give up something he was used to. He just had this wonderful, generous idea. He said, you know, this sounds like a good idea. Why don't you guys come here? And I'll give you one of these rooms. I think had that not happened, I can't imagine that we would have made it in this barn. But yeah, that's how it started. And Gary and I had been classmates together at Oberlin. So he was a year older than I, and we played so many things together, and that's sort of how the idea came up. We had heard of the Strasbourg Percussion Group, and that was, you know, kind of really the only one. So Gary went, being a year older, he left Oberlin when I was still there. He went to Buffalo, and there was this thing, a couple of things around the country they were called, you know, creative associate positions. There was a big Rockefeller Foundation grant funding new music. And the reason that this very, very interesting program in San Diego at UCSD has existed ever since, that was one of them. That's how that got started. And there was one in Buffalo, and Jan Williams was there, and Gary was invited to join Jan Williams and play in this, contemporary chamber music ensemble. And that's where the idea sort of arose, that we should make a percussion quartet, that it didn't, no such thing existed in the country, and we wanted to give it a try. The other thing you mentioned about a salary, the first 6 months, so there was no money. It was just that we had a place to go. And then in the middle of that very first year, a position came open up at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, where Greg Beyer is now. But then there was one percussion position, and what was this? This would have been in, 1973, I guess. And the department had just gotten big enough that they could actually accommodate, they could use a second position. So Al O'Connor, who taught there, had heard about us down in Champaign, and he called and said, would you guys be interested to take this second position as a group? So once again, it was just, a tremendously lucky thing, a beautiful, generous idea of someone who helped out, just a lucky thing at the right moment. So yeah, but that was one small second position, which we had to agree that we would divide between the four of us. But what was good about it is that it just meant that Al O'Connor ran the department. He was the one who, had to fix the broken snare drum stand and order the tambourine head and assign the wind ensemble parts. And all we had to do was divide up all of the other students and teach some lessons and do some percussion ensemble. But it was actually so little money that they gave us the option, and we decided we should take the salary just on 9 months, because by the time we divided it for 4 people for the whole year, it just wouldn't have been a meaningful amount of money. So we took it for 9 months on the assumption that we weren't going to die. Somehow we would survive.
Get rich touring those other 3 months, yeah.
Well, the deal was we were free to go as much as we could. And in truth, all of us were on food stamps for all of those summers. We all worked in the local food co-op. The Blackearth truck was the truck. One of our contributions to the food co-op was that we used the Blackearth van to go around to the local farms. This is hilarious. This is actually true. We actually did this. We'd go and pick up the honey from this guy and pick up the flour, the ground flour from that guy, and deliver it back to the food co-op in DeKalb. And for that, we got free meals at the weekend or something like that. I don't know, but it was, that's sort of how it worked.
There's that expression, what is it? Luck is when opportunity meets, or what is it? Yeah, luck. What's the expression I'm trying to say? Anyone? Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. That's what it is. It sounds very much like the early days. But you mentioned Smith Memorial Hall, and I'm proud to report that the basement of Smith Memorial Hall is still the percussion dungeon at Illinois. Yeah. There's nothing but percussion down there, and there's just some really cool vintage gear. They have a lion's roar that's signed by John Cage in the basement, which we got to use for third construction. So that's pretty cool. But this is like just a weird way of segueing into. I think it originated in Blackearth and Percussion Group Cincinnati still does it. The lion's roar that has the little lion stuffed animal on that. Could you tell us like whose idea was that? It's such a cool little thing.
That's a Percussion Group Cincinnati thing. And actually, even the better idea though is that when we started, when the three of us here, a long time ago, started playing Dressur, the Kagel piece Dressur, that's a story too. The Blackearth group played Third Construction. We did the European premiere of Third Construction. It hadn't even been published. It was just then published in 1976. So in that sense, it's like contemporary with Safa, right? So we got a copy of it. We were playing it on tour. We played it. We were playing it in Cologne, in Germany. And after the concert, this young guy comes running up to us, and you know, he thought everything was, he'd never seen anything like it. It was great. He said, "I'm a student of Kagel, and he's working on a percussion piece right now." And he gave me a Xerox of it. I mean, I think you guys should see it. So he runs back to his apartment while we're packing up afterwards, and he comes back with a Xerox of Kagel's manuscript of Dressur. That was must have been 76, or no, well, whatever, 79, maybe 78, because it was the last year of Blackearth. So Blackearth never played Dressur. But in the first year or two then of Percussion Group Cincinnati, I was tremendously interested to do this piece, and we had Kagel's manuscript. So, and in there's an instrument, and he draws the pictures and all of that, and it's a lion's roar, but it's like a cuica, you know, that he uses a dowel rod. And of course, that makes perfect sense that if you start with a bongo and make a cuica, and you can just keep getting bigger and bigger. And that actually is much more reliable than the string. So we always have used, ever since then, when Percussion Group Cincinnati does Imaginary Landscape #2, that's the piece where I mean, we use it when we do Third Construction, but we started then in Landscape #2. I don't know why I got the idea. Again, we were probably on tour in some little, and I saw this very cute little lion, and yeah, you know what it reminds me of though is a much more serious thought. That one of the things that Herbert Brunn, a number of things that were so powerful to me and have been a real touchstone for this whole time, is Herbert saying that what one wants is to not take oneself too seriously, to take the work very, very seriously, but not take yourself too seriously. And I think we've actually been successful at that. And I think if you think about it, how the career of the group, especially Percussion Group Cincinnati, in the ways that it has a little bit of a different feel than some others, that we've taken the work very, very seriously, but we didn't take ourselves so seriously. So, you know, if we saw something like that, a little lion, I mean, it's tremendous fun we've played that piece a lot, that particular piece on all kinds of chamber music concert series. I mean, for years and years, Percussion Group Cincinnati, we would be the these concert series all over the country where it would mostly be string quartets, chamber music series for string quartets. And every year they would have one thing which was different. A brass, maybe a brass quintet one year, maybe a woodwind quintet. And that's where we found a niche. And it was always a big success. It was fun. It was people who didn't know this kind of music very much. But it was also interesting that we sometimes we'd get invited back, but it would have to be like 8 years later, because they'd have to go through their cycle of one brass quintet, one woodwind quintet, one, So anyway,
you kind of already said this, but I love that performing like the most serious contemporary music and Third Construction and things, and there's like this little stuff line up there. It's so cool. But since we broached the topic of Dressur, we now go to Karli for a question.
Alan, I'm so excited that you mentioned this piece because I love the piece so much and I could talk about it all day, I think. But I wanted to ask you, it's great to hear that you saw a manuscript, you know, I assume prior to having heard it performed. And I'd love to hear, what were your initial reactions? Do you remember, what were your thoughts as you look over the score for this piece?
Well, again, a couple of things come to mind. We played it then before it was actually published, and shortly after we had played it here, I noticed that it had been published, and we got the published score. And what was then fascinating to us is that there were all kinds of things in that manuscript where he had actually, for instance, the setup, you know, what people should be where. In the printed score now, he made a decision who should be where, what the order is. If you see any video of us doing it, we're not doing it that way, because in the manuscript, he said, you know, set up wherever you want. 3 people, but it can be in any order. And we happened to choose a different order, and that he later decided he wanted it in some particular order. It didn't seem worth it for us to redo our whole way of doing it. And there are a number of things that he actually kind of, I would even say, simplified in that final version. The person, I'm the guy who puts on the wooden shoes and does the dance, and that person, at one point, you're actually playing, before you start the dance thing, you're playing on the wooden shoes. You're sitting there playing on them with claves, and in the original manuscript, simultaneously with that, you're playing like a little recorder, blowing notes on that recorder. So I had to find a way to sort of hold the recorder between my knees, play all of those notes, and while I was banging on the shoes. And then when the printed score came out, that actually had been simplified, and that's not there anymore. There are a few little things like that. It's not so important, but I've often thought, if anybody like you, if you ever saw our, I think there's an old YouTube thing of us doing it.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of things that we do differently. It's not because we couldn't get it together or didn't know what we were doing. We actually had a slightly different story. So
that's interesting.
You know, the other thing about it is that one of the reasons that it really appealed to me is this very thing that we're talking about, is the idea of this balance of how you are taking yourself seriously or not taking yourself seriously. Or so I've seen many performances of this piece, which I'm a really hard time with, because I feel that it really spoils this piece, misses the point, to draw attention to yourself as some sort of comedian, to be on the stage acting stupid, acting silly. It's not what the piece is about. The whole idea of dressage. So it's the German word that we use in English, the French word dressage, meaning, you know, horse training, this kind of horse ballet for the Olympics, that kind of stuff. And what is that about? Well, it's an animal which is, in a sense, abused in this way, which is made to do ridiculous, stupid things that have nothing to do with that animal for the entertainment of others, but the horse simply does as it's told. So we took it that this was, again, an absolute socio-political statement. This whole piece was about people who just go about their business because doing what they're told. They don't know that they're idiots. They don't know that they're funny. They don't know anything about it. They just do what they're told, just like those horses. So in that sense, again, fun as it was to play the piece, and you know, another thing about that, I mean, now these days, I think one could look on YouTube and find all kinds of things of flamenco dancing, but boy, even back then in the late 70s, I had to go to the library and check out, I guess they were one of those VHS, kind of, things. I was looking for things to get good examples of flamenco dancing, so that I could sort of copy and sort of figure out how I was gonna, what improvisations I was gonna do, and
I imagine even procuring all of the instruments and objects that are called for in the score would be a much greater challenge in the 70s than it was hard enough, being able to go on eBay and order things from all around the world. Now, which we can do. Did you have trouble finding anything called for in the score?
I wonder. I mean, I think we ended up kind of making a bunch of things, as I remember, and we've still got all of that stuff. It's also interesting that he, in the printed score, as you would do it, he says there's a specific little circular platform to do the dance on, which was not in the original score. So I've actually had a little more freedom than most people to use a little bit more space, because it wasn't originally thought of as being confined to that platform. Though, I mean, if you go to Spain, if you see this kind of beautiful dancing, generally it is kind of confined to a specific wooden platform. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, it's such a great piece. Thanks for sharing your insights on it with us.
Boy, what was a hard thing for me was that's also the part where you have to play the coconuts, on your bare chest. And I remember that was a big, that was.
And you drew the short straw.
Well, I mean, I really, it was very clear that I was the one who was going to be the dancer. I wanted to be the dancer, and I was going to be Jim or Rusty or who, Juhas was in when we first did it. But that meant I also had that part. And I had a little bit of vanity about what it was going to look like for the dance and for the whole piece, and having to work it out, wearing a vest. How did I do that vest so that, so that I could quickly get this whole thing off, play that part on my chest, and then still put it back on, without it having to be a t-shirt or do the whole piece without a shirt or something. Yeah.
Right. The logistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much fun. I wanted to ask you, because you've obviously paved the path for so many of us with everything that you've done, and I can only imagine what it must have been like. And it's so exciting to hear all of this from you. But I always think to that anecdote that says, there's two shoemakers that go somewhere off the edges of their part of the civilization, and they enter I don't know, a village. And one of them writes home and says, total disaster. Nobody wears shoes. I cannot make business here. And the other one says, this is amazing. Nobody wears shoes. I'm going to make so much money. And I can imagine that the world of percussion must have felt similarly back then. And I'm wondering, I really appreciate you sharing the beginning of your story. And I think it's really humbling, and it helps us connect, because we often think, oh, because we're not maybe paid as much as we'd like, or we cannot make a living, whether we're good at it, are we good enough? Should we continue, and so on? And the story that you shared is so important. But I'm wondering, back in those times, and now that you know how the world works today for the younger ones, were there any other hurdles that you came across? Was it easy when you sent out those postcards? Did people react with, pleasure and enthusiasm, or was it a lot of chirping? How did the world react to you?
We sent those letters and postcards mostly to composers, or other people who were teaching in percussion departments. And I guess the fact that we were willing, the one thing we spent money on was, we didn't have a lot of personal equipment, but we pooled all of our personal equipment, figured out what we needed to buy collectively, but we did buy a van, so we had our own van, and and the idea that we could do this pretty economically. The four of us could get in the van and write all of these little postcards and letters to composers who were teaching at universities all over the country, and say, we're passing through. I can't tell you how many times I remember, we slept always in people's houses, or I slept in dorm room. Other percussion students, we'd sleep in their dorm rooms, or we would be able to say, if you've got $300, and we could really make these tours out of it, and that's sort of why it was able to work at that time. In truth, we all had girlfriends who also were somehow, contributing to the rent or something. And I have to say that I guess it's true that we actually believed in what we were doing. We had some thought that it was worth keeping at this, and that in the longer run, it would come to something. And therefore, it was fine to be sleeping in dorms, or bringing we brought sometimes tents and sleeping bags in the right weather and slept outside, but it was possible to make these little tours and just ask for $200 or $300, and it didn't matter, because we would just keep going down the road and do the next little performance. I have to be also honest about it, that in retiring from the university, already 3 years ago now, I think, I thought I loved teaching. I loved the students. By this time, the position there, they left us alone. I'm just in the basement. I could do whatever I want for a long time already. We have wonderful students. And though there were other things to think about, not the least of which was, in a sort of self-deprecating sort of way, well, I've been doing this for 40 years. One could either be very proud of that or embarrassed about it. Really? You can't think of anything else to do after 40 years? So I really thought that while in my own humble opinion, while I was playing as well as I've ever played, that I should be able to do something else. That I, in no sense did we think of it as stopping the group. We're not very busy, but Jim and Rusty and I, we still have a few things to do, and we want to do those things. And but mostly just the idea that I had lots of ideas, like this project with John on the Innocents. But the year I retired was, the first year after that was 2018, which was Herbert Brunn's 100th anniversary and Frederick Rzewski's 80th birthday. So there were all kinds of concerts where I could go and just play the music of Brunn and Rzewski, solo pieces, and kind of relive those Blackearth years of just throwing stuff in my little car and driving around the country and playing these concerts and not worrying too much about the money of it. But all of that is a tangent to what you were asking, because I wanted to say that one of the reasons, when I made up this imaginary list of what I loved about being at CCM, what worked very well, and on the other side, reasons to think about doing something else. One of them was, very seriously, that my experiences 40 years ago were in an environment so different from what your environment is now, that my deeply felt advice about how I did it was beginning to be hard for me to say that to an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 23 or 24-year-old. I mean, it's in our tiny little circles, it's well enough known that Blackearth and the group in Cincinnati, we didn't do the industry kind of sponsorship thing. You have to think back to the late 60s when we came of age, in the early 70s, and everything about the idea of what it meant to us to be an artist, and separating the idea, the very high ideals of philosophy and art, from the idea of corporate, of being a business. I never met, I don't think, I certainly would say it now, I don't mean this to be judgmental of anybody else who makes a different decision. And more so, I mean, as younger and different people are involved with all of these companies, of course, I know many people who now work for these companies, and they're wonderful people. They're people who did their percussion degrees. They're seriously concerned about the quality of the instruments and the sounds. And in that sense, I'm not meaning to be judgmental about it, but I have to say, I'm just of a generation where it wasn't right, and it remains not right for me to feel like I have some connection to multinational corporations in order to do the art that I want to do. And I finally come off of my tangent back to your question, and my answer was that I felt less and less comfortable giving that advice to a younger person. I know why that was right for me. I'm just a little less comfortable to tell a 21-year-old, therefore you shouldn't get a sponsorship either, because what? Because Karl Marx, or I don't know. So
it very much reminds me of the whole Charles Ives philosophy of, Ives was independently wealthy, and he thought that if you made money from your art, you weren't a true artist, because you eventually would have to cut some corner and compromise in order to pull a profit. So
that's why I don't pay y'all.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want you all to, not be artists all of a sudden with this podcast.
But, well, Alan, I had a question to take us in a bit of a different direction here, and I'm actually going to use Brady Spitz asked a question via Facebook, so I'll ask Brady's question and then interject my little bit into Brady's question. Brady says, how do you cultivate creativity in your students, not just percussive skills, but artistry independent of instrument? And in my correspondence with Alan getting this whole thing set up, I mentioned, I always like to track your lineage of who your teacher's teacher was. And one of my teachers was Christopher Deane, who is a former student of Alan Otte. And when I think of creative, brilliant minds in percussion, Christopher Deane is probably in the top of that list every single time. So Alan, could you tell us both answers to Brady's question, and then just like, what was Christopher Deane like as a student? I can't imagine.
Yeah, you probably can imagine, actually, what he was like. What was also very interesting about that is that Chris had finished his undergraduate degree and had been out working in North Carolina a bit, doing whatever he was doing, and then decided to come back for his master's degree. So he was already a little bit older than anybody else, and he was re-entering academia after having been a real person. And that, we've had a few people over the years do that, and that's always difficult. And so there was some real friction about Chris, who was already, and not just a student, he was a real person. And that's the connection to John Lane, is that John studied then with Chris, and Chris said to John at some point, you know who you would probably make a good connection with? You should do your doctorate in Cincinnati. You ought to get to know this this Otte person. So, and Chris was right, obviously, about that. But the actual question, I really think it has to do with all the things we've just been talking about. That on the one hand, from my percussion teachers, principally Richard Weiner was teaching at Oberlin when I was there. And that was really what was so formative about that, was that he was the principal percussionist of George Zell's Cleveland Orchestra, who came down to Oberlin one afternoon a week. So I had my I saw him for 55 minutes a week. And those were like the most precious 55 minutes that you can possibly imagine. I mean, I had a notebook. Every question I was going to ask him, every minute of my time with him had to be used in the most productive possible way, because then he was going to be gone and Gary and I were going to be on our own. But what was so great about that was that it meant that the adults in my life as a student were the composers on the faculty. They were the ones, you'd go to theory class, and then after theory class, some young theory teacher would say, "Hey, have you seen the score to Ziklus? I mean, it was just written 8 years ago. And, look at this." So the idea of even, playing Ziklus on my senior recital, Richard Weiner didn't know anything about Ziklus or Stockhausen, but if he would come and listen to it, he would listen to it like George Zell listened to him playing the triangle in Brahms. And that was just wonderful. What could be better than other people sort of guided me through the ideas, the philosophy and aesthetics of these things. And then I had someone who was the most beautiful ear and technician of these kinds of things. And it was really a formative idea for the Blackearth Group, and then Cincinnati, the whole idea to bring that level of expertise, the highest level of playing that existed in symphony orchestras. I wanted to do that for Cage and Stockhausen and for my friends. So the teaching has been that way very much all of these years. I wanted to always make it clear that what I was talking about in the teaching studio was because I was doing it myself. I was a practitioner of it. We've played a lot of music over these years of student composers at CCM. I suppose, lots of master's students or doctoral students, people who were a tiny bit older, slightly more advanced, but undergraduates as well, meaning that I just paid attention to student concerts, and anytime I would hear a piece, didn't matter what, electronic piece or a clarinet quintet or something, but some kid who was doing something was clearly very interesting, we would ask them, "Come to the studio, look at what we've got here, let's talk about this, could we develop something?" So we always played pieces by, we weren't checking the journals to find out who won the Pulitzer Prize and that's the people we should play. I was playing the music of my friends or of students, or because in that kind of partnership, I felt like we could really develop something that was tremendously useful for that community, for us, for that person, for the community of CCM, and I think those kinds of it just became obvious that there was that the whole career, so to speak, was about something other than promoting the career. There was always all kinds of ideas. And I think some people were maybe a little bit surprised that if you knew that we played the amplified cactus music of John Cage and danced Kagel with wooden shoes on our feet, I studied all the orchestral repertoire with Richard Weiner, and I loved that stuff, and I was darn serious about it. And that's, before you get to do amplified cactus, I want to, your Kiji sounds like shit. I'm sorry, that's got to be better, So I guess that those, just kind of, how one lives a daily life in that sense seems to have, by osmosis, been passed on.
I remember I read something, it might have been from John Lane, and I know John has a philosophy sort of like this, that Alan, that you said there was Bartok and maybe one other, maybe Stravinsky, I can't remember. You said, other than these two composers, basically every piece I play like is written by a composer that I know and have worked with. And John also does very much the same thing. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Casey, I think you had something.
Yeah, I have a question kind of has a continuing on the historical path that we're on. There's a quote that I believe John Lane attributed to you, which is that it's something you said is the good old days of new music. And to say it one more time for everyone, the good old days of new music. And I didn't really know what this meant until we were doing a concert here at JMU and we're playing a bunch of new pieces, you know, a lot of real audience-friendly pieces, and then we're also playing ionization. And it struck me right then, like, wait a minute, the newest sounding piece, the most progressive sounding piece, the most avant-garde sounding piece on our concert is the oldest piece on the program, and in fact, the only piece with a dead composer. And so I've used your quote in all of my oral exams for both master's and doctoral students. Of course, I know what I think the quote means. I've put my own version of what it means, and I ask my students to, in a way of asking a percussion literature and history question, what do you think Al Otte meant when he says the good old days of new music? So I want to know what you think that means.
It reminds me that I can be slightly tangential once again and say, in sort of, and I mean this again it's a sort of a self-deprecating sort of way, that the whole idea of Blackearth and Percussion Group Cincinnati was an anachronism by the time it got going. So the thing that was so precious to me was this idea of the string quartet that you know, when I was at Oberlin with Richard Weiner, we didn't have a percussion ensemble. If you can imagine going through a whole undergraduate degree and there wasn't percussion ensemble, what the hell did we do? Practiced excerpts, you know, and we didn't do four mallet marimba. So I was jealous and envious of all my friends who were in chamber music, you know, who got credit for string quartet and wonderful things like this, and were developing these intense kind of relationships. And so this really was a very serious feeling about wanting to make this kind of experience for percussionists, and we would simply have to do it ourselves. So the idea of Blackearth, and then, you know, maybe even more so, more finely honed with Jim and now Rusty, was this idea of contemporary chamber music playing in the grand European tradition of the greatest string quartets, you know. Well, even for Blackearth, this happens. We didn't know about Nexus. We didn't know about one another. Both groups start, and you know, what were they doing? Well, they really had their finger in a very positive way, you know, on the pulse of world music, of improvisation, and then just slightly after that, you know, the whole ragtime kind of thing. All these kinds of things which became such fun and so important to from then. And I often felt, you know, there I was defining this already anachronistic idea that I wanted to be taken seriously like the LaSalle String Quartet. And it was sort of a joke, you know. But that's the kind of thing where the music was not about, you know, as you said, that now we have more music, which is really quite easy to present to any audience at all. You know, lots of music which will be fine as a film track, you know, back some lovely beach scene in some nice movie about, there's all kinds of percolating, groovy, lovely kind of stuff with, very cool Miles Davis chord changes and just at the right time, and we sort of came of age just before all of that stuff. The first time I heard Steve Reich, I heard two of my friends at Oberlin played piano phase, and it was like this crazy sculpture, alive, a sonic sculpture of this thing that just sat there, and even the early Phil Glass pieces were like that as well. In that sense, I must say I much prefer 6 pianos to 6 marimbas. 6 marimbas already sounds like that beach background music, whereas 6 9-foot Steinway pianos metallically banging this thing out. It really was a sonic sculpture just sitting there. But my point just having been that all the music we played had to do with philosophical statements, aesthetic statements, connections to literature and other art world kind of things, and the whole connection of what the greatest string quartets were ever doing when they commissioned a piece by Ligeti or Lutoslawski or played cage string quartets. That was the fantasy anyway.
Cool.
So to me, does that sort of answer it? That
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Mhm.
Well, speaking of music with a message, and Karli mentioned this earlier when she did her miniature history lesson at the beginning. It's really interesting to me to hear of Alan's very long record of music for social change, most recently with this project of the Innocents, but obviously stretching far back further than that. And Karli found an interesting article to share with us, and then I'd love to hear Alan's thoughts on especially the Innocents project, which we've very briefly mentioned a few times but haven't really dug into. But why don't we start with Karli?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So the article that I found is called Plans, Polonaises, and Unarmed Men, The Role of the Protest in Classical Music. This is written by Colleen Phelps of Nashville Classical Radio, and it was published back in June 1st of 2020, which was during the time of all the protests that were taking place, nationwide and also around the world following the killing of George Floyd. And I thought this was all very interesting because even if we already know some of these pieces or all of these pieces and their stories, it's really nice to hear about them kind of back to back and just see a slice of the social relevance that classical music has had over the years, especially for any of us that sometimes wonder if what we're doing in classical and contemporary music really does have cultural relevance. Here's a reminder. And also at this time of year, we're probably all doing some reflecting on everything that happened in 2020 and looking forward, what are things going to look like? And some of us may be wondering how we can use our art to make a difference in 2021. So here's some inspiration, I hope. The first piece that Colleen Phelps discusses is Nabucco by Verdi, going way back to the 1800s. At the time of the premiere in 1842, Italy was under foreign rule, and the chorus of Hebrew slaves from the opera has been interpreted as a call for freedom, especially this line from the middle of the chorus, O mia patria si bella e perduta, meaning, oh, my country, so beautiful and lost. More recent use of this as kind of protest music, after performing this chorus with the Rome Opera in 2011, Riccardo Muti actually spoke out against cuts to funding for the arts throughout Italy. And then after this performance, invited the audience to sing along during an encore performance of the chorus. So that was pretty interesting to find out. Another example of classical music becoming involved in politics is Poland's kind of adoption of Chopin's heroic Polonaise. This was broadcast on Polski radio every day at the start of World War II. This Polonaise was written in 1842 during the wave of European upheaval and revolutions, and was nicknamed Heroic by Chopin's partner of 9 years, George Sand. So by the time of World War II, this had very much become a symbol of national pride for Poland. Another really remarkable work that's discussed in this article that you have probably never heard live is called And They Lynched Him on a Tree. It's an oratorio by William Grant Still with a text by Catherine Garrison Chapin. And the piece is written for orchestra and it's scored for 2 choirs. One white choir that represents an angry mob and another black choir that represents the mourners of the lynching victim. This piece was premiered in 1940 and it's actually been performed less than 30 times since then, probably because it's so heavy and dark and emotionally stirring. And just for some reference, with this piece, as William Grant Still was completing the piece, there was actually an anti-lynching bill that had passed successfully in the House of Representatives, but then failed to pass in the Senate. So that's where we were with writing this piece. This was 1940. So I thought that was remarkable. Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time is another very well-known work. We all know, I think the story and political significance that the piece was written and premiered in a concentration camp where Messiaen was a prisoner during World War II. The premiere took place in January of 1941, reportedly outside in the rain for an audience of both prisoners and soldiers alike. And after the premiere, a prison guard forged a stamp that allowed the release of the musicians from the camp. This piece, I think we all know the unique instrumentation: violin, cello, clarinet, and piano. Those were the musicians there in the camp, and he wrote for them. That's what was available. And the piece is dedicated by Messiaen to the angel of the apocalypse, who raises his hand towards heaven saying, "There shall be no more time," which is a reference to Revelations from the Bible. Let's see, there's a few more really wonderful examples that the author discussed. Also during World War II was the premiere of Shostakovich's 7th Symphony, which is the Leningrad Symphony. The piece was planned to be premiered actually during the 1941-1942 season by the Leningrad Symphony Orchestra, but 2 weeks before the planned premiere, Shostakovich decided to try to evacuate the city during Germany's invasion, even though he was still finishing up the piece. However, the rail lines had already been cut at that time, so he wasn't able to evacuate, and he was, reportedly writing, finishing the second movement, finishing the piece while moving between bomb shelters. And the piece eventually did get a premiere on August 9th, 1942, of course, later than originally planned by surviving musicians. And it was broadcast on loudspeakers throughout the city so everyone could hear it as the Leningrad Symphony. So a few other examples include O King by Luciano Berio, which was written in 1968 following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Some other quicker examples: Come Out by Steve Reich was written in 1964 when Reich was asked to create a sound collage to benefit the Harlem Six, who were 6 Black youths who were arrested for the murder of Hungarian refugee Margit Sugar. And only one of these 6 were actually involved at all in the murder, so 5 of them were being, wrongfully accused. And that was Reich's contribution to help benefit their cause and their kind of public view. Another piece you might be familiar with is The People United Will Never Be Defeated by Frederick Rzewski, which was composed in 1975 and is based on the Chilean protest song written by Sergio Ortega. It was written, the original song, the Chilean protest song, was written 3 months before the bombing and military coup of Augusto Pinochet and his regime, and it became the theme song for Salvador Allende's Unidad Popular in Chile. And Rzewski used this song as a theme for his set of 36 variations. They're organized into 6 groups of 6. A few more examples.
Sorry, Karli, if I could jump in, I wanted to mention one other performance of the Rzewski When Donald Trump was inaugurated in 2016, I know at least one performance. I saw it on YouTube, but some people performed this piece as a counter protest to his inauguration, which I thought was very, very powerful. And I love Frederick Rzewski, but in my humble opinion, this might be his finest work, and quite frankly, like one of the top 3 pieces of music I've ever heard. It's I think 45 minutes long or so. It's just astounding.
You're not the first person I've heard say that, Ben.
Yeah, and there's a score, like a score follow along video on YouTube, and I mean, I've just sat there in wonder listening to it. It's so amazing. But sorry, Karli, to interrupt. I had to get in my Rzewski bit because I love that piece so much.
But I have a very specific connection that Colleen Phelps, who was a student of mine, is married to a fine pianist and organist. And I have a nice house out here in the country, and I do house concerts. You know, I can invite 15 or 20 people. I have a very nice piano, and her husband played for the same reason you just said, that in response to the Trump, Matt Phelps learned the People United and performed it here in my house on a house concert. And you know what was so wonderful about that is Matt has this huge church job. He's a church organist and choir director, so he's much accomplished improviser. So the idea in this Rzewski piece that after the 36th variation, you can do a big improvisation. I mean, this was someone who was tremendously comfortable to do that exactly. But anyway, we all interrupted you. So.
No, it's wonderful. Well, and it just proves the point, like this is all so relevant culturally, socially today with political movements and everything. Thanks for sharing that. So just a few more pieces actually to mention. Ukrainian composer Catherine Likuta wrote a piece called Bad Neighbors, which is basically about the 2014 Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it also kind of quotes Ukrainian folk music and dance forms. So it's celebrating the Ukrainian heritage. While also, you know, Bad Neighbors is of course referring to Russia. That's the bad neighbor. And there's one more that is really, really remarkable. Composer Joel Thompson wrote a piece called The 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. It's a response to police brutality and the killings of unarmed Black men. And in the piece, Thompson actually quotes the last words of 7 unarmed Black men who were killed by police officers, Kenneth Chamberlain, Trayvon Martin, Amadou Diallo, Michael Brown, Oscar Grant, John Crawford, and Eric Garner. And the structure of the piece is inspired by Haydn's 7 Last Words of Christ on the Cross written in 1786. So I do want to say this article is great, and it also has some really wonderful videos that are embedded to check out and listen to each of these pieces. So it's wonderful. I definitely recommend searching it up. It's on 91classical.org. And it's written by Colleen Phelps, so I encourage you to check it out.
Well, Alan, with that as sort of a starting point, could you tell us about, in particular, the Innocence Project, but also maybe historically a few of your activism projects?
Well, you said you said that you thought People United was certainly Rzewski's greatest piece, and unfortunately, I have to agree with you. But what about The Fall of the Empire? That's pretty good, don't you think?
Yes, that would be definitely one of my other top ones.
Frederick is a difficult person. Most people, know a little bit of the stories that he's just very, very, he's very honest. There are no filters about what he's going to say to anybody about anything. That was a fun project that came about over a period of time where he would send just in a little business envelope over a period of months. I would he would write something and fold it up like a letter, and coming from Brussels, I would get this little letter, and in there would be 4, 5, 6 pages of some Xerox of. And as he began, he said he had no idea how many pieces he was going to make. and he was coming to Cincinnati for a summer project, and these pieces just kept coming. He kept writing more. I forget how many there ended up. It got a little nerve-wracking as we got very, very close to, and he was still writing little movements and adding to the piece. I watched your podcast with just recently with John Lane, thinking that I should have some sense of how you do this and what might be said, and so John spoke very well about this whole Innocence project, the whole history of this thing, of our sort of coming to it by accident. One thing that has happened now in recent years, that we've made a much stronger effort. I mean, partly the idea of my retiring from the university was to have more time, that I could just be totally free to travel more and do these things. Well, of being able to do this for not we do it. We sit on panels with lawyers, and we met exonerees and people who are working, and but we've now done it a number of times, not only in schools, which is a moving experience to do this kind of thing for kids, but we've done it in percussion departments. We play it, we do a workshop for other percussionists, and just to talk about this very issue that you're bringing up here. And often people have, somebody likes it, some of the students like it a great deal, and is this written out? Can we get this music? Could we do it? And the answer always is that we very much felt like we made it for ourselves, and that what we would wish to be a takeaway is that this happened to be our issue, happens to have become our issue. But for so many of us, there are so many things of tremendous importance going on all around us, that we would rather have it be an inspiration for other people to think about whatever subject it is that touches them most deeply, and that in a sense we mean to a little bit light a path in this way, that you can make. If we were if you're a string quartet or a clarinetist or something, maybe it's a little more daunting to think about making your own piece to play on your own senior recital or graduate recital. I think for all of us percussionists, though, I have a tremendous history of a sensitivity to, I love the idea of making pieces for ourselves. What we learn about our instruments, what we know that no composer could know, what we can learn about. I feel I know much more about Beethoven and Mozart, having tried myself to make some little piece, Whether or not these pieces should then be published and disseminated and everybody should be playing the pieces of other percussionists, I think that's thin ice. We have to be careful about when we're making something just for ourselves, and when we're making something that we wish many other people will play. So in the case of John and myself, we really wish it to be a little inspiration in that sense, that look, you too can find your an issue. You can read about it, you can find poetry, you can find texts, you can get a cardboard box and whatever it's going to be. Would rather have that be the takeaway from this experience.
That's so wonderful, and it does seem like such a very personal thing. Well, Alan, I think we're moving on toward closing time here. And I had one anecdote I wanted to share to sort of wrap up the episode, but I wanted to ask if there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we move on toward wrapping.
Do you have 90 seconds? I was thinking I could play. I have something I could play that I just happen to have I'm working on.
Oh, great. Yeah, that'd be great.
Come with me to the piano.
We know we have a strict no percussion policy on this podcast.
We made one exception for Steve Schick, and that's
Oh, good, it's piano. Yeah, then it's allowed actually.
Yeah, that sort of works.
Wow, cool.
fantastic.
Mark Saya, Saya, was a composer who's written a lot of things for the group over the years. He was a student here many years ago, and he's written this whole series of pieces called From the Book of Imaginary Beings, after this a book of that name by Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine writer, who collected all of these tiny little stories from all over the world of imaginary beings. So Mark has written over the years a whole series of percussion trios, some of which have piano and some don't. This was it's some years ago already, but it was the last one he wrote. And this is called the Simurgh, which is this mystical Persian bird, which is on a quest to find Sufism, and is collecting other birds to fly with him to the mountaintop of the Sufi masters. And I mean, if anything is a confused little mystical Persian bird, I think I think Mark caught it there. Yeah, the whole piece. I mean, it's just a tiny little excerpt, but there's this little piano solo in one moment.
Can you describe the preparations under the hood there?
Yeah, it's actually very simple in this one.
All just stopped strings? Yeah,
it's just there are three sets of pitches for all of the keyboard instruments, and in this case, it's just what I use. I mean, it comes in Cage as well, but when it says with rubber or a muted piece, one thing that works really well is if you have bicycle inner tubing. So and then you just snip a little piece of that inner tubing like this. So it's a double. You know what I mean? You end up with a little rubber circle.
Sure.
Because you've cut it like that. So then that gets inserted like this between the three strings, and usually when Cage and in Mark's case, usually when it's rubber like that, and it's sort of this George Crumb effect, right, of where you touch the string as close as you can to the keyboard to get that muted sound. But to get that in a preparation, you have to do the opposite and put the piece of rubber as far back on the string as possible, right at the pins. And as you, Casey, noted, the higher up on the keyboard you go with those things, the more it turns into a wood block. So all of those preparations are just rubber. Then, and in this little solo, he doesn't use the ones where there are rattles. There's a whole other set of notes which have a little washer, and the more noisier birds, the less contemplative birds.
How fun, man. That's yeah, really great.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Well, as I mentioned, I had one anecdote I wanted to close on. And before we hit record today, listeners, you won't get to hear this, but before we hit record, I shared a little anecdote from my teacher, William Mersch. And I wanted to actually close on an anecdote from William Mersch about Alan Otte. And when I see Alan perform pieces like Touch and Go by Herbert Brun, and hearing you talk about, for the first time, getting your hands on the score of Dressur, William Mersch said that a lot of people would say, why? And Alan Otte will say, why not? Which I think is a lovely, lovely tribute to why not? So thank you so much, Alan, for your generous time here. It's been such a pleasure to hear from you. And we look forward to our next episode number 266. Thanks so much.
So nice to meet you all.